Welcome to the Authentic Change Podcast. I'm Mike Horn, your host, and this podcast is for leaders and coaches who need and want fresh perspectives on what it means to live and to lead authentically. You're a leader who wants to make a difference, but sometimes you feel stuck. You know there's more to life and to leadership than what you're currently experiencing. It can be tough to figure out how to grow as a leader. You might be reading all the blogs and books, but it still feels like you're not making progress. You might even be feeling like you're doing everything wrong. On Authentic Change with Mike Horn, we interview experts who share their insights on how to live and lead authentically. Our guests are trendsetters in building great leaders, teams, and organizations. We provide fresh perspectives on what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. Welcome to this episode of the Authentic Change Podcast.
Welcome to this episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn. I am absolutely delighted to have in the virtual studio today Adrian Koehler. And he is, in many ways, what I would describe, having had some discussion with him, having read his biography, really in the spirit of Renaissance, of coming alive. And maybe that is reflected in his website, takenewground.com, and how that emerges. But I'm so delighted Adrian Koehler is in studio today. He is a leadership engagement expert and senior partner at the executive coaching firm, Take New Ground. He coaches executives and entrepreneurs in the art and science of leadership for themselves, their teams, and clients to create unprecedented results and experience fulfillment in their work. And Adrian, again, welcome. Can you say a few words about yourself?
Sure. First off, thanks for having me here, Mike. Love the podcast, Authentic Change. Wow, I could do 5 hours on that. I'd love let's just explore that domain. Anyway, I won't take the bait. All that stuff's fascinating to me. But yeah, you hit it. So I live out here in LA. I've got an amazing wife who's a successful entrepreneur. We've got a house full of kids and a house full of animals, and trying to make it happen. I've got that consulting firm we talked about, Take New Ground. We just love working with leaders. I guess it makes sense why people don't do what would be most meaningful to them. I can understand why it's hard for some folks, or maybe the options aren't there or whatever. But this is legacy work for me. I wake up every morning excited to jump into really meaningful conversations. And, my parents don't understand it because I'm like talking. I was a real quiet kid and I'm talking all day, and I'm having even my wife, she's like, you talk all day long. I said, I know, it's really weird. I dig it. Every hour by hour, I'm talking to somebody else that's taking on some huge mission, and they're both alive and scared to death simultaneously. And just being with people at that crossroads is just the biggest joy for me. So I love this work. I've been at this work for about 12 years. Before this, worked with murderers in prison, running leadership programs, ran a foundation. Before that, was a pastor, which makes me a pretty weird guy. I have a master's in theology, so it makes me even double weird, and helping people take on spiritual change. But I was really an activist for a decade of my life and taking people around the world to make a difference. And before that, I was an ICU nurse working to help kids stay alive. So pediatric intensive care, and being with families in the worst day of their life, and just trying to do everything I could from a science perspective and an art and relationship perspective to help bring some light into that really dark spot. Not too unlike some of the board meetings I sit in now, and some of the executive offsites, and some of the tough conversations that people are going through as they take on this venture, a business, and come to the end of themselves. And anyway, I have a heart for folks that feel like it's lonely at the top. And if you're going to run something, it's unique. We call it lonely. It's just really unique. And anyway, I love being in somebody's ear when they're really taking on something that's important to them and really reveals all of themselves to themselves, and helping them integrate all those conversations. So that's me.
Yeah, that's great. And I was thinking about working with founder-driven companies and that passion you have for that work. In my consulting practice, I've met founders at different stages in their career some who have grown, successful multi-billion-dollar companies in very short periods of time, and others that, when they're sitting around a bench table with maybe two or three other people. Do you notice, and it's a question that I'd like to explore two sides of, if you don't mind, Adrian. And one is, do you find there are common themes, intersections among entrepreneurial founders, regardless of what stage their organization or organizations are in? And as you think about that, relative to yourself, Adrian, what's the common intersection that led to all of these, what I might characterize as helping careers? Whether it was nursing, whether it was a spiritual minister, whether it was helping the incarcerated. I'm looking for some common themes here between those two domains.
Sure. Well, let me start with the second part. It took me a while to figure it out, by the way, what some common themes were. Even when I started doing this work, like a dozen years ago, as I was saying, when I started, just claimed I'd been through some training, and I'd always kind of been in these types of conversations naturally. I was just the guy people came to and said, "Hey, I want to talk about something. You had a minute?" Or I'm the guy at the party that talks to one person for an hour and a half, and we go super deep. And I can be gregarious, whatever, that guy, butterfly guy too. But really, my preference is to have all those deep conversations. And when I got into the coaching work, I would always dread if somebody said, "Well, how'd you get into this work?" Because I didn't in my mind thought, oh, well, typical coaches come out of some kind of maybe successful business career and kind of transition out and have something to teach from their own experience. And I'd never founded a huge company with an exit. I'd never been a corporate person. I'd be fired from a corporate job. I never really even had any kind of traditional job. Mine was always very entrepreneurial. So anyway, it took me a while to figure it out. And the through line for me, to your question, is I love being with people in these huge moments in their lives. And at these crossroads moments, I would call them, and these the moments that really test us, the moments that we can't plan for. And when we have to deal with the chaos, who was it? Anne Lamott said, life is unforgivingly complex. And when you're dealing with all that complexity or that chaos, and the notion of in the chaos, either we crumble or we stand, like that, I think it's wired into the human genome. We know it's true, because every movie since we started making movies has this 3-part arc, right? This 3-act series where, the hero's journey, if you will. And we're always looking for and want to follow the hero, the unlikely hero. And I always want to help people find their own internal hero, where it's you're coming up against something and this is either going to be the worst day of my life, or maybe I just stand right here and make a courageous decision that I'm proud of 2 years from now. And left to ourselves, that's a pretty complex game. But if you get somebody that believes in you and somebody that's summoning you to the surface, our chances go up. So being a fierce advocate for people, that's what I call it, has always been my most joyous activity. Advocacy, in all those different domains you're talking about, advocacy has been, I used to call myself a champion of people, right? So it's cheerleader out front. I was a quarterback in high school and blah, 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 right? So I'm the guy calling the huddle, wind at their back, believing in people, that. And I realized I think my greatest gift is actually be an advocate versus a champion, which is looking somebody in the eye and believing in them and then challenging them and summoning them to the surface and inviting them to have their finest hour. And I did that at the bedside, in the hospital setting, for parents that wanted to be all crazy or internal or dramatic or all those types of things that are really natural ways to deal with chaos or ground themselves and be effective at the bedside and put first things first, and ask for what they want, ask for what they need. Or taking people that were really successful and I would invite them onto these overseas trips and have really the experience of their life doing something that they'd never done before, which took a lot of risk, especially for successful people, getting outside of their domain and caring about somebody else deeply, or working with murderers in prison, and believing that they could actually make the difference now that they wish they would have 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and helping them deal with the consequences of their choices in a real way and just see how they are a murderer, or, how they did that. Why did they do that? Not like a victim conversation, which all of them are in, just like most of us naturally go to, I did it because, and fill in the blank, whatever the fill in the blank is, that's been running their life, the color of their skin, their neighborhood, their lack of fatherhood, their blah, 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 all those stories. Or I chose this and there is darkness in me that I need to be real with. And we call it hugging the cactus, and see that and not wear it like shame and not wear it like I'm justified, but like own it. So it stops owning me, that type of thing, and helping people make have those courageous epiphanies, because it takes courage to like own that. Like, oh, wow, I am a mixed bag of both sinner and saint all the time. Like this guy talking right now. I've got great stuff in me and it makes a big difference for people. And I'm also a selfish deceiver, liar, cheater, all that stuff. I've done it all. And I need to own all that darkness. And if I own it, it doesn't rule me. I can actually have dominion over that. And so anyway, being with people in those moments, that's the through line for me. And I'll get to your first question. Everybody I work with is really brilliant. They're like 2 to 3 times smarter, 5, 10, 100 times smarter than I am. And they're ambitious off the charts, and they're committed off the charts, and they are captivated and obsessed with some mission. And you better be, otherwise you're not going to make it. And at the same time, because they don't look inside enough and don't decide to make self-mastery their number one obsession, and we could talk about what that is, but make self-mastery their number one obsession, they end up sabotaging their lives and sabotaging their families, sabotaging their mission. And they do it. And they're full of reasons why they must do it. And they're full of reasons why the market or the board or the investors or the senior team or the whatever, long story about what else is running their experience. And so similarly, there are some themes, as you're saying, which is most of the people I work with, one of the themes is they have always been extraordinary. I mean, most of the people I work with, they've always been the top of the heap. They've always been the person out front. And a lot of their frustrations are, why don't they think like I think? And their frustrations with their people or enrolling a team is like, I don't know why they don't work as hard as I do. And so helping them understand that they are unique, and not like out of pride, but out of ownership. Because if I can get their own uniqueness, they can stop asking other people to be just like them, because they're not going to. But then they can actually engage them in a way that works, instead of setting the bar high enough where they would hit it, but other people are not going to hit it. And then spending their time frustrated and then being very passive aggressive. That happens obviously all the time. Or just firing people. Then we'll say they're not the right person for the job. Instead of, I didn't find a way to communicate with them that worked. I didn't find a way to integrate their interests with my interests. I didn't find a way to slow myself down, and actually get to the heart of the matter. And I was dealing with symptoms for 5 years instead of getting to the core issue. I mean, that's a theme. They're haunted. I mean, every time I talk to every time I talk to a new potential client, at some point in that first call, most of the time, I'll say, you know what? I know something you privately struggle with. It's like a secret. And they'll get all lean in and, probably get a little bit nervous. And because you're so good at what you do, you can perform 6 out of 10 performance and nobody notices, because you're so good. Your 6 out of 10 is as good as most people's 10 out of 10. And they kind of nod to that and they smile or they laugh a little bit. And I said, but you're haunted by that, because you're not living up to your full potential, and you get to set your own bar about what your full potential is. So the aim of my work is to help them own that gap between their own, because they're surrounded by people that aren't going to challenge them the way I'll challenge them. So own that gap between their 6 or 7 out of 10 and 10 out of 10. That's their own personal mission. And how good could they get? How healthy could they be? How impactful could they be? And not buy into all the social norms around what's acceptable in business culture, and really have their own sense of integrity about what their own bar for themselves is. I mean, other themes, most of them I mean, all the successful ones, they're really good at starting the company, and their vision is huge. Their skill set is there. Their competency is there. Their network is there. Their all that. They start the company, and then at some point, and for different people to different places, but let's say a couple years in, sometimes 5 years in, they're full of complaints because they have to do stuff that a CEO does now, and they really like being a founder. And so they are complaining about running the company that they built. And there's this identity shift, this challenge for them because they love this thing. And all of a sudden now the day-to-day work has nothing like what it was in the beginning. And they don't actually want to be CEO. They don't want to manage anybody. They're entrepreneurial. They don't like managing people. They definitely don't want to be managed. And then they don't like managing people either. So there's this tension for them. And really, they need permission to say, hey, do you want to step out and step up, really? Step up into a board role, step out, hire somebody you trust. And then you got to break through all those conversations because they immediately say, well, who's going to be able to do this? And there's no way they're going to, be able to do what I can do, and help them learn how to trust people. They've built a life on not needing people and like carrying it on their own. I mean, so many of this Lone Ranger mentality is there where they just do it on their own. And they're used to being, if they weren't an entrepreneur before and they worked at a company, they were the rock star at the company. And part of the way they became a rock star is to be really independent. And now if they're running a company, their independence will ruin the company. They need to actually be integrated in ways that they didn't have to be when they were working their ways through the ranks or working at a previous company. So engaging with others, and they're always a handful, man. I mean, I joke, and it's just very true. Like I work with, I didn't ask what my language needs to be on this call, but I work with type A dickheads. Those are my favorite people. Like really on the edge. They're all maniacs. They don't naturally kind of work well with others. I mean, there's some people that do out there, but the ones I work with, at least we start where, talk about some relational collateral damage they've got going on for them and how all that they don't see and what's possible for them, and a handful of conversations that would just require a handful of frameworks in their mind that I can help teach them, but then a lot of courage that's beyond the type of courage that they typically employ, because they can launch a product, launch a business, raise $100 million. And that takes courage for the average person. But these people can pull that off. But going and sitting down with a CMO that's not performing well and say, hey, doesn't seem like you want to be here, or you seem frustrated. What am I doing that's keeping the frustration alive for you? What is there anything, first off, can we agree about current reality that this isn't working very well right now? Yes, good. Here's what I want for the future. Do you want to get up to that? Is there any way I'm contributing to this breakdown? Please teach me about that. I'll own that and shift. And then here's the shifts that I need you to make. And calling people up to that. That's a different type of vulnerability than the kind of more transactional, take the mountain type of vulnerability they're used to practicing. So those are a few themes that come to mind that come up with almost all my clients.
It's interesting as many of my clients are scientists, engineers, and technologists, and also driven by their smarts and their talents, often with personalities that are similar to how you describe them. I think at a certain point when the company outpaces their capacity for what you might describe as BS or the bureaucracy, and no judgment there. I mean, a lot of bureaucracy is very helpful to thinking about organizational size. I think boards often struggle with, are we better with them or without them? Are we better with him, her, or them, or without him, her, or them? And I think it's one that I've never seen successfully resolved, and leads to division within the board, and really is effective. And I wonder if you might have any insights or observations in that regard.
Yeah, we work with lots of PE firms around these tensions. For example, like, of course, because a lot of them will be on the board, take a seat, and they've invested, and they obviously want return, and then they want as little amount of drama as possible. Yet, if they're going to actually protect their investment, they got to go jump in the drama. The drama as it sits today, right? The goal is to go order the chaos and have us all take a step up and act like people that are really committed to making this work. But most folks, I mean, I don't know. It's just, I think it's human nature. We just prefer the easiest path. And nobody is really trained on how to intervene. We watch TV shows about interventions, and that looks interesting and it's fascinating. But like to go have one myself, to go talk to this high-powered person I'm at stake for, right? If I'm in a PE firm, I've invested, $50 million in this company, and I need this guy or gal or whatever to not blow up. And so it's a vulnerable conversation, and they're not trained in it. So we do a lot of that work. Just second call into a new PE firm, working with one of the partners, and what's usually needed in that intervention with the founder is also needed for them internally. Just because this company in particular has been together 25 years, they've lots of dysfunction, a lot they're not talking about, and so to air the issues with the founder would actually also air the issues that we've got that we're not talking about. And so, at some point, we run out of room under the rug, and we can keep sweeping stuff under the rug. At some point, we kind of run out of room, and we got to start dealing with things. And that's why, my joy, I love talking to folks every day. I do one-on-one conversations with people, but really love it getting together with 6 to 8 people in a room.
I find that many of my scientists, technologists, and engineering distinguished executives and leaders often don't come to me willingly.
Yeah,
they're not people
they get assigned to you.
they're not people who routinely seek out coaching. Not that they're adverse to it. In fact, they're some of the most creative and adept learners that are out there, and often among the as you described earlier, often the smartest person in the room. As you described in someone that you quoted, it made me think about one of our lifetime's best-selling books, The Road Less Traveled. And Scott Peck opens that book up with the sentence, "Life is difficult." Most of these people were often at some transition point. And as I listened to one of your Instagram reels, you talked about complaints being latent visions. And I thought about that because it's certainly a theory of change that guides my work, is that the amount of change that can happen, the amount of productive change that can happen, has to be a multiplication of dissatisfaction. Got to have some sort of dissatisfaction with the current state, with status quo, something that's bothering you. You might express that as a complaint.
Well, it comes out like it's vocal. I mean, it happens internally, which I think is your point.
Yeah. So let me just go on. So you get this multiplication event. So you need that dissatisfaction, but you need some vision, right? You need some idea of where you're headed, how it might look, what at its most elementary. I mean, success with a goal, and you need to be able to take some first steps. So I was just curious about, and all of that has to be, in greater degree to understanding the resistance that you might have to changing there. I mean, the immunity to change. But as I was thinking about that, I like the idea about complaints being latent vision and the relationship between that, equation, that change equation. I wonder how you might think about that.
Yeah. Well, most people, I think the hard part is most people just settle for complaints and end up having a culture of complaints.
I see.
Or avoid them, right? So it's like, oh, Tom's in here again complaining about blah, blah, blah. And so what we do, back to, I don't know, I said a phrase earlier around dealing with symptoms instead of getting to cause issues. Someone on my team, their complaint isn't the issue. Their complaint is a symptom of the issue. Most of us naturally want the least amount of problems on a regular day to deal with. That's normal. And we got a lot to do. So we will try to solve for the complaint. Like, how do I help him stop complaining? Or we actually don't even ask ourselves that question. Usually we just say, I wish they would stop complaining, and we just avoid them. Most of the time people do that. I do that sometimes. Instead of inquiring into the complaint. So especially if it's chronic, like it's not brand new, it's been around for a while. If Tom comes in and is complaining about something, most folks won't take the time because, we're busy, quote unquote. And so we'll pay long time. Short-term gain, save them 5 minutes on a Tuesday, long-term pain. Tom's going to be complaining about the same thing for 5 years. We do that equation instead of saying, hold on, let me take the 45 minutes and sit down with Tom and say, hey man, I hear you complaining about this. Let's talk about it. What do you really want here? And listen and hear it out. Because there is the gap between the complaint is just a flag saying, hey, I don't have what I want. This isn't working. And there's a view that if it stays this way, it's going to get worse. But we're not mature about it and actually slow down and have the full conversation. So we keep putting Band-Aids on these issues instead of sitting down and saying, hey, okay, good. And we've got a whole stack of questions to ask. We call it mining the conflict. And it's very strategic and it's very ownership driven. All of our work is very personal responsibility driven and very future driven because most of our reactions in the moment, if not all of our reactions in the moment, are connected to what we're making up about the future that's implied if this continues. Like we're almost always projecting a future. And so the anger behind the complaint is connected to the future that someone sees is coming if the complaint isn't resolved. So getting in with conversation about if this doesn't shift, Tom, how bad is it going to get the pain up, to your point? Good. What do you really want to see here? How are you contributing to the question we don't ask is, Tom, how are you contributing to this complaint? I know you're complaining about Susie, but tell me, how long have you had trouble with Susie? Oh, 6 months? Have you talked to her about it? I've tried to 5 times. Well, tell me about how you've talked to her about it. Okay, let's talk about that. Great. Now, and if we can get some complicitness in the breakdown, and then you're going to call Tom into being responsible for his side of the story, which we don't do any of this stuff usually. And then you can call somebody into solving for their own complaint. And if they're willing to do that, then you've got a new future that's possible. But if someone is just kind of at effect, the philosophers would say, at effect of the situation, like Tom's experience is crafted by somebody else, there's really no possibility there. There's just options and kind of moving things around. There's nothing new that's going to happen if Tom doesn't want to take responsibility. So honor the complaints because any complaint is a cry for help. So that's the way I see it. Just so I get on the other side and I sit shoulder to shoulder with Tom and say, hey, we got an issue here, man. Let's talk about this thing. I'd love to help you solve this. Do you want to solve this? Yes. Okay, good. I want to help you solve this because your complaint is yours. But I'm here to help you solve your problem. And whatever I can do to do that, wonderful. But I'm not going to do the heavy lifting for you because I'm paying you a lot of money. So I'm paying you to solve this issue. But you coming in here next week saying the exact same thing, that doesn't work for me. So I'm going to call you into something new. So honoring the complaint, and Tom wants something new and he just might be handcuffed. He might need new resources. He definitely needs a lot more courage, needs a lot more responsibility if the complaint is chronic. Can I make a distinction between acute complaints and chronic complaints?
Most of the clients, or many of the clients, better say many of the clients I work with, they have many broken relationships. And let me just think about that because, I write a lot and produce a lot of content and speak on authentic leadership. And at the basis of authentic leadership is trust. And what I've observed about trust is that for many people, it's difficult to gain. Once you lose it, it's almost impossible to recover and it can diminish very quickly. And if people don't think you have, if they don't trust you, they won't think you have integrity. And if they don't think you have integrity, they won't trust you. So there is this circle around, I think, a calling to be authentic. And when you are one of these very talented, super smart people, raising the bar, as you described earlier, is often a way of thinking about elevating your own performance, and it can be quite challenging to everyone else around.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I've noticed that with visionaries too. Everybody will have 50 goals all of a sudden. You don't meet many of those people, in organizations very often, but every once in a while, there's a rare encounter with, an organizational visionary. We will have people working on all kinds of things, which is, usually very cool environments to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. I always warn them, when I'm working with a client, and if I'm not yet working with the organization, I'll just say, hey, if you raise your game, a lot of people, the resistance comes next because, as humans, we're pretty codependent naturally, meaning like the senior team is working with the founder. Let's say the founder's sideways and is really brilliant, but toxic. Let's just say, quote unquote, that happens from time to time. They're brilliant, but toxic relationally. The senior team that's been there for 3 years, they actually like it that way. They'll complain about it, but they like it that way. Meaning, first off, I know that's true because they would have left if they didn't. So current reality yells that out. But also the shift at part of the joke here is like, and we know this, the whole codependency model came out of like addicts, right? So we see this true in family units for sure. It's an easy place to see it first, where it's like, let's say there's a abusive father, drunk or whatever. Let's just say he's a drunk, abusive father. And then there's a mom that's like the hero and she's the caretaker and she's protecting the kids from the dad and all that dynamic. Ironically, if the dad gets sober and starts to deal with himself and gets healthy, the mom actually gets more resentful because she loses the power of being the caretaker, i.e., being the superior one in the system. Same, if you're dealing with a founder that's sideways and crazy, if that person actually ups their game, then all the people that have been really comfortable in the complaints resist because they're used to being the savior. They're used to being superior to this person that is a necessary evil. And people stay. Some people don't want to raise their game and they don't want to look in the mirror because as long as there's one main villain in the story, they don't have to look at their own villainous behavior. Is villainous a word? Their own villainous behavior. They don't have to look at that, and it gives them lots of hiding places. Like as long as there's drama created by somebody else, there's lots of hiding places. But if they turn the lights on and the founder gets really clean, gets really clear, gets authentic, owns his or her shit, and goes in, goes again, seeks forgiveness, gets on the right path. Some people don't want, ironically, counterintuitively, don't like that, don't want that, and they'll resist it.
And what I've also observed, though, is that the board can inflict its own drama by hiring around the founder and moving the founder into other organizational roles. And that, I think, compounds situations in some dramatic ways, because certainly you have probably competitive and competing interests at play between other people the board is seating versus the founder.
Yeah. And usually the issue is that there's so much behind the scenes politicking that's happening. Why I lose clients or why people don't work with me is that usually the solution is let's get together and talk about it. And they don't want to do that because that turns the lights on and it reveals people's positions and their agendas. Yeah, but to your point, that stuff happens all the time. And it's really hard for people
Very difficult.
Recraft their own relationship, period, right? Get off of their own very safe dogma and be open and reflective and be open to something new. Like they really don't want to be open to something new. There's lots of fear there, lots of unknown territory. And so that's just human. And so we all struggle with that. But there's not a container for that conversation like, hey, this isn't working. And here's how it's going to die. And we're all going to lose our jobs. And the board's going to, blah, blah, blah. And so that's going to happen unless we talk about how to talk about this or have the conversation about the conversation is what I call it. Let's zoom out. We're going to go through a period of lots of uncomfortability. And founder, you're in this role now and shifting. That means you don't have the rights and privileges of what you used to. And you've got all these tendencies to go do that. And now from here on out, from every time you do that, that's going to get corrected. And if it doesn't get corrected over time, we're going to boot you. That's what's going to happen for the safety and the purpose of the organization, which is to be successful down the road. You don't get to stay if you keep playing like that. And we don't talk like that, which is kind of to the point and loving. I think it's loving. Like that's why it's advocacy for me. It's like, hey, founder, listen, you were great. And now you're not good anymore. You're not good at this. You got to get you out of the CEO role, but we'll leave you in the chief creative role. But now you can't keep dabbling over there. And if you keep dabbling, we're going to have to remove you. And I don't want you to go. Do you want to go? And I don't know if you can handle this shift. So lots of love and lots of conviction around it. Instead, we'll do this passive thing and kind of pat people on the head and act like it's not difficult for them. It's hugely difficult.
Adrian Koehler, how do people get in touch with you and with Take New Ground?
Yeah, they can find me on Instagram, of course, adrian.k on Instagram, takenewground.com. You'll see how we talk about our work there, and we're pretty robust about it. Or we've got a Naked Leadership podcast. My business partner and I, and one of our other colleagues, he hosts it, and we talk about these issues and really talk about. We call it Naked Leadership because it's if you lead really well, it's going to be vulnerable. If you step in authentically and deal with it, there's lots that you don't want to see, and lots of fears, lots of concerns, lots of uncertainty, all that stuff. If you do it well, you could do it poorly and be safe, or you could do it well and be vulnerable. And so that's why it's around Naked Leadership, because we talk about the issues, and we're not like, here's the 5 steps to hire someone. We might actually talk like that. We talk about how to think about all these and get connected to the principles that ought to drive behavior. So we talk strategically and philosophically in a very principle-based conversation, not so mechanistically like there's a lot of great content out there about mechanism, and everybody ought to go listen to that, but that doesn't do the trick. Where you're coming from actually does the trick, and what your commitments are and what your intentions are. That, what's the old rabbi say? Love covers a multitude of sins, or something like that. So anyway, people can find us that way. And love to engage with anybody that's in these contexts, in these tensions, and just have an exploratory conversation about it.
Well, lots of great ways to connect with Adrian Koehler and to find out more about the work that he and his team do at takenewground.com. And that'll all be in the show notes. And I encourage people to go out there and visit Adrian Koehler at takenewground.com. And Adrian, if you were to leave our audience of people who are helping successful executives in sciences and technology and engineering to propel their journey for the remainder of 2023, what would it be?
Yeah, so advice for the helpers. What's my biggest advice? I think usually what's needed is a lot deeper listening and some less advice giving and a lot deeper listening. And if you do that really well, people are going to solve their own issues a lot of the time, because for all of us, like if I can hear my own voice, then I can probably own it more clearly and I can take courageous action. So go have a gutsy conversation, which might be pointing out the thing you've been avoiding for a long time. If I come up against this all the time in a coaching call, there's like a thing that my intuition knows I ought to go there, and then I talk myself out of it. But, if you're a helper, go ahead and have the courageous conversation. It will put the relationship at stake, most likely, and it'll also deepen it if you walk your way through it. So go have the courageous conversation. They're dying for it, and you'll have a raving fan forever.
Thank you for that invitation, Adrian Koehler. It's been great to be in conversation with you.
Mike, you're awesome.
Thank you. And until the next episode of Authentic Change with Mike Horn, stay well.
Thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast. I'm delighted that you've tuned in to listen. Please visit the show notes for links to topics discussed in today's podcast. To download a free ebook on authentic change and leadership and to subscribe to my newsletter, please visit mike-horn.com. Once again, mike-horne.com, mike-horn.com. Once again, thank you for listening to the Authentic Change podcast.